The table broke before anyone even said good morning. I remember the sound of it, a sharp crack that rolled across the lecture hall like thunder, and I remember thinking that this was going to be the worst semester of my life. Draxus had slammed both of his heavy fists down on the new student's desk, and the desk had simply given up. Metal legs bent, the surface split down the middle, and the new student, the human, did not even flinch. My name is Velkesh. I am a Threxian, which means I have 4 arms, gray skin, and a heart that beats far too fast whenever trouble starts. And on that morning, Trouble was standing 3 meters tall in the middle of tactical theory class, breathing hard through his wide nostrils, staring down at the smallest cadet the Galactic Concord Academy had ever accepted. Her name was Grace Miller. She was a human. She was the only human in the entire academy, and until that morning, most of us had never seen one in person. Let me explain what the academy is, because you need to understand it to understand what happened next. The Galactic Concord Academy sits on a neutral moon, and it trains young officers from over 200 worlds. We learn strategy, diplomacy, engineering, and history. Every species sends its best. The Korgath send their princes. The Velari send their sharpest minds. My people, the Threxians, send students like me, quiet ones, who are good at studying and bad at everything else. And then, for the first time in the Academy's history, Earth sent someone. I had heard of Earth before she arrived. Everyone had. It was the planet the Concord scientists whispered about. In the official records, Earth is listed as a Class 12 world. To give you an idea of what that means, my home world is Class 3. A Class 3 world has gentle weather, mild seasons, and no large predators. A Class 12 world is a place the Concord politely calls a death world. Crushing gravity, storms that can flatten cities, diseases that mutate faster than medicine can chase them. Creatures with teeth longer than my fingers. Most species who evolve on such worlds do not survive long enough to reach the stars. Humans did. But here is the strange part, the part none of us understood at first. When Grace Miller walked into our class on her first day, she did not look dangerous at all. She was small. Her skin was soft, with no scales, no shell, no armor of any kind. She had no claws, no venom, no natural weapons that anyone could see. She wore a plain gray uniform, carried a single bag, and found a seat in the back row without saying a word to anyone. The laughter started almost immediately. Cadet Rillos, a Velari with 6 glowing eyes, leaned over to his friends and said, loudly enough for the whole room to hear, that the Concord must be running out of real species if it was letting pets enroll. The room filled with clicking, hissing, rumbling laughter, each species laughing in its own way. Grace Miller looked up once, let her eyes move slowly across the room, and then went back to arranging her materials on her desk. She did not argue, she did not defend herself. She did not do anything, and that, strangely, was the first thing that unsettled me. I have spent my whole life around students who fight for status. When someone insults a Korgath, the Korgath roars. When someone insults a Velari, the Velari answers with a cutting remark designed to humiliate. Every species pushes back. It is instinct. It is survival. The human just watched. I began to notice small things about her in those first days, things I could not explain. When she entered a room, her eyes went to the exits first, not in a nervous way, in a calm, practiced way, the way our instructors taught us to scan a battlefield map. When someone walked behind her in the corridor, her shoulders shifted slightly, keeping the person in the corner of her vision. When she sat down anywhere, she chose seats where nothing could approach her back. She was always measuring distances, angles, hands. I told myself I was imagining it. She was just a quiet transfer student from a strange little planet, nothing more. Then came the strategy exam, and everything changed. Commander Thalor, our instructor, is an old Austrian with a voice like grinding stone. He does not praise students. In 3 years, I had never once heard him say the words, "well done." The strategy exam he gives at the start of each term is famous across the academy. It is a simulated fleet battle with no correct answer, designed to be unwinnable. The goal is not to win. The goal is to lose slowly, to show discipline while everything falls apart. The highest score anyone had ever earned was 71 points. That record belonged to Draxus. I should tell you about Draxus now, because he is the reason this story exists. Draxus is a Korgath prince, second son of a warrior dynasty that has ruled its home system for 1,000 years. Korgath are apex predators. On their world, nothing hunts them. Nothing ever has. Draxus stands 3 meters tall, with plated crimson skin, curved talons, and shoulders wide enough to fill a doorway. He is not stupid, whatever people say. He is actually brilliant at tactics. But he has never once in his life been second at anything, and his entire sense of who he is rests on that fact. The exam results were posted on the central board in the main hall, as they always are, ranked from highest to lowest. First place, Grace Miller, 94 points. Second place, Draxus, 73 points. I was standing near the board when Draxus saw it. I watched his crest rise slowly along his spine, plate by plate, the way it does when a Korgath prepares for a hunt. I watched his talons flex open and closed. The hall went quiet around him. Nobody moved. 94 points. Nobody had ever scored 94 points. The instructors reviewed her simulation 3 separate times, convinced there was an error in the system. There was no error. She had done something no cadet had ever done. She had refused to fight the unwinnable battle at all. She had retreated, scattered her fleet into asteroid fields, sacrificed her flagship as a decoy, and bled the enemy dry over 60 simulated days until the attacking force ran out of fuel and supplies and simply had to go home. She never won a single engagement. She won the war. When Commander Thalor asked her to explain her thinking in front of the class, she stood up, and I heard her voice properly for the first time. It was calm and level, and she said something I have never forgotten. She said that on Earth, they have a saying, "The best victory is the battle you never have to fight." Thalor stared at her for a long moment. Then he did something I had never seen. He nodded, just once, and he said quietly, "Well done." That was the moment Draxus decided he hated her. That was also the morning, 2 days later, when he broke her desk. He stood over her in the lecture hall, his breath steaming in the cool air, the shattered table between them, and he told her in front of everyone that cheaters had no place among warriors. He said her score was a trick, a lie, a soft creature hiding behind machines. He said that, on his world, prey animals who pretended to be hunters were taught their place quickly. The whole class held its breath. I held all 4 of my hands tightly together under my own desk. I have seen Korgath anger before. It usually ends with someone in the medical bay. Grace Miller looked up at him. She did not stand. She did not raise her voice. She looked at the broken desk, then at his talons, then at his eyes, and she said 5 quiet words. "Are you finished with that?" Not a challenge, not an insult. She asked it the way you might ask about the weather, and then she picked up her materials, moved to the next desk over, sat down, and continued reading her notes as if the largest predator in the academy were nothing more than a loud noise in the background. Draxus stood there, chest heaving, waiting for a reaction that never came. You cannot fight someone who refuses to be prey. You cannot dominate someone who does not acknowledge the contest. He had thrown his strength at her, and it had passed through her like a stone through smoke. Commander Thalor entered a moment later, looked at the broken desk, looked at Draxus, and assigned him 3 weeks of maintenance duty without asking a single question. The class began. The moment passed. But it had not passed. I could feel it. Everyone could. That evening, I found myself in the archive wing, unable to stop thinking about her. I looked up Earth in the Concord database. I read for 6 hours, and with every page, my heart sank lower and lower. The other students believed she was weak because she had no armor and no claws. But the records told a different story. Humans had no natural weapons because they had never needed them. On a world where everything was trying to end them, they had survived with something else entirely: patience, endurance, cooperation, and a strange, frightening calm in the face of danger that no other known species possessed. There was one line in the report that I read 4 times. It said that early Concord scouts had observed humans keeping large predators inside their homes, not as prisoners, as family. They had taken creatures with killing teeth and turned them into companions who slept beside their children. I closed the file and sat alone in the dark archive for a long time. Draxus thought he had cornered a prey animal. I was beginning to suspect that no one at this academy, not one of us, had any idea what was actually sitting in the back row of our class. The alarm in the training dome screamed at exactly the wrong moment, and Grace Miller was 40 meters underwater when her breathing unit failed. I want to be clear about something before I continue. I did not see everything that happened during those weeks with my own eyes. Some of it I watched, some of it I heard from others, some of it I only understood much later, when I finally learned how to see the way she saw. But the breathing unit, that one I witnessed, and it still visits my dreams. It was the 3rd week after the broken desk. Our class had moved on to hostile environment training, and the exercise that day took place in the deep water dome, a massive tank built to imitate the ocean moons of the outer systems. Each cadet was given a sealed suit and a breathing unit, and the task was simple: descend to the bottom, retrieve a marker beacon, and return. Every unit was checked twice by the equipment officers before the drill. Grace reached the bottom faster than anyone, and then, 40 meters down, with the whole class watching through the observation glass, her unit stopped feeding her air. I know now what I did not know then. Korgath maintenance duty includes the equipment room. Draxus had been serving his punishment there for 3 weeks. Nothing was ever proven. The inspection logs were clean. The unit was recorded as an unfortunate malfunction. But I saw his face at the observation glass that day, and Korgath faces are not built for hiding satisfaction. Here is what should have happened. A cadet, at that depth, with no air, should panic. Panic burns oxygen. Panic ends lives. The emergency divers were already suiting up, and Commander Thalor was shouting orders, and I was pressed against the glass with all 4 of my hands, watching a small gray figure at the bottom of the tank. She did not panic. She went still, completely, impossibly still. She looked at her gauge, looked at the surface far above her, and then she began to rise. Not fast, slow, controlled. She let the air already in her body carry her, releasing it in tiny measured streams, her arms moving in long, calm strokes, her face relaxed, as if she were doing nothing more difficult than walking down a corridor. The medical records later said she was underwater without a functioning unit for over 3 minutes. 3 minutes. My species cannot hold its breath for 30 seconds. When she broke the surface, the emergency divers were still 10 meters away. She pulled off her mask, breathed deeply twice, and then asked the equipment officer, in a perfectly level voice, whether she could get a replacement unit, because she had not yet retrieved her beacon. She went back down. She finished the drill. She logged the fastest time in the class. That evening, I found her sitting alone in the observation lounge, looking out at the stars, and for reasons I still cannot fully explain, my legs carried me to her table before my fear could stop them. I stood there holding my tray with 2 hands and wringing the other 2 together, and I asked if I could sit. She looked at me for a moment, then she moved her bag off the chair beside her and said, "Sure." That was the beginning of the strangest friendship of my life. I learned things about her in the weeks that followed, small things, ordinary things, and each one made her more of a mystery instead of less. I learned that she had a mother and a father back on Earth, and a younger brother who wanted to be a pilot. I learned that she liked her food spiced so heavily that the smell alone made my eyes water. I learned that humans sleep for 1/3 of every day, which shocked me, and that they dream almost every night, which shocked me more. I learned that she laughed easily at small jokes and never at cruel ones. And I learned that she knew exactly what Draxus was doing, because the breathing unit was not the last incident. It was only the loudest one. Her navigation console developed errors the night before assessments. Her locker seals failed, and her study materials were soaked in coolant. Her name vanished from the roster for the orbital flight rotation. An administrative mistake, they said. So sorry, nothing to be done this term. Each event alone looked like bad luck. Together, they looked like a hunt. A slow, patient, deniable hunt. The kind a clever predator conducts when the rules of civilization forbid an open attack. One evening, after her ration tray had been knocked from her hands in the dining hall for the second time that week by a Korgath shoulder that was somehow always in exactly the wrong place, I finally asked her the question that had been burning inside me for a month. Why do you let him do this? Why do you never fight back? She was quiet for a while. Then she set down her cup and gave me an answer I have carried with me every day since. She said, "On Earth, we do not fight to prove that we can. We fight when we must." And then, only once. I did not understand. I told her so. I said, "But he is humiliating you. Every day he takes something from you and you give him nothing in return. On my world, we would call that surrender." She smiled at that, just slightly, and asked me a question instead. She asked, "Velkesh, when a storm is coming on your world, what do your people do?" "We take shelter," I said. "We wait for it to pass." "Do you go outside and argue with it?" she asked. "Do you feel humiliated by the thunder?" "No," I said. "Of course not. A storm is just weather." She nodded and picked her cup back up. "Exactly," she said. "He is just weather." I sat with that answer for days. It bothered me, and it took me a long time to understand why. Every species I knew treated conflict as a ladder. You push, you get pushed. You climb or you fall. Status was everything. But Grace was living by a completely different set of rules. Rules from a world where the environment itself had been the enemy for 1,000,000 years. On Earth, I realized, wasting your strength on pride could get you ended. Humans had learned to save their strength for the moments that truly mattered, and to let everything else wash over them like rain. But there was a second half to her philosophy, and I glimpsed it only once before everything happened. It was late, long after curfew, and I could not sleep, so I walked. The academy at night is a maze of dim corridors and humming vents, and my walking took me past the auxiliary training hall, where a single light was on. I looked through the door panel. Grace was inside, alone, training. I stood there in the dark and watched a human move for the first time, really move, with no audience and no reason to hide, and my hearts forgot their rhythm. She was working through forms, patterns of motion, and they were like nothing our combat instructors taught. There was no roaring, no display, no wasted movement of any kind. Every motion flowed into the next. Redirection, balance, leverage. She practiced falling and rising, until falling and rising looked like the same motion. She practiced stepping inside an attack, again and again and again, moving toward the danger instead of away from it, closing distance with a speed that my eyes struggled to follow. I learned later that humans call some of these arts by gentle names: the soft way, the yielding art, systems built not on strength, but on using an opponent's own force against him, developed over thousands of years by a species that was almost always smaller than the things it had to face. She trained for 2 hours. She never once looked tired, and when she finished, she stood in the center of the empty hall, closed her eyes, and breathed slowly, and I understood at last that her calm was not the absence of ability. Her calm was a choice, a leash, a door she kept closed on purpose. I went back to my room that night and could not sleep at all, because a terrible thought had taken root in my mind. Draxus believed he was hunting her. He believed her patience meant fear, that her silence meant weakness, and every day that she did not respond, his contempt grew and his caution shrank. He was walking closer and closer to that closed door, absolutely certain there was nothing behind it. So I did something foolish, something no sane Threxian would ever do. I went to warn him. The Korgath dormitory wing smells of hot metal and old stone, and their common room fell dead silent when I walked in. Draxus was seated at the central table with his followers around him, and I stood before him, 4 hands trembling, and I told him the truth. I told him what I had read in the archives about Class 12 worlds. I told him about the breathing unit and the 3 minutes. I told him, choosing my words as carefully as I have ever chosen anything, that humans were not what the Academy believed, that their softness was a costume, and that if he kept pushing, one day he would push through the costume and find something underneath that no Korgath had ever faced. He listened to all of it. Then he leaned back, and he laughed, and the whole room laughed with him. He said that it was touching, the little gray scholar defending his soft pet. He said that Korgath were the apex of the galaxy, that his bloodline had never known defeat, and that if the human ever dared to show this hidden strength I spoke of, he would be delighted, because then he would finally have permission to correct her properly. He told me to run back to my books before I embarrassed my species any further. I left. Behind me, the laughter followed me down the corridor. Walking back through the dark, I passed the main hall where the exam board still glowed, her name still fixed above his, and I understood something with cold, perfect clarity. This was never going to fade. Draxus could not let it fade. Every day her name stayed above his was a wound that his pride reopened each morning. The sabotage, the shoulders, the trays, all of it was him circling closer, testing, escalating, searching for the moment when he could finish what her exam score had started. And she knew. She had known from the first day. She was not enduring him out of weakness or fear or even kindness. She was giving him every possible chance to stop. That is the part that haunts me, looking back. All those weeks, all those quiet insults absorbed without a word, all that patience that everyone mistook for surrender. It was mercy. Mercy delivered in advance, day after day after day, to someone too proud to recognize it. The storm was not her. The storm was coming for her, and she was simply waiting, calm and still, for it to arrive. It arrived on a gray morning in the 10th week, in tactical theory, in front of 43 witnesses, and it lasted less than 2 seconds. Commander Thalor said her name, and I felt the room tilt. That is the only way I can describe it. We were 40 minutes into the morning lecture, reviewing the previous night's fleet simulations, and Thalor had just displayed the results on the Great Wall screen. One solution stood apart from all the others, elegant and strange and impossible to argue with, and Thalor, who praises no one, tapped the screen with one stone-gray finger and said that this, cadets, was the finest defensive analysis he had reviewed in 40 years of teaching, and that its author was Cadet Miller, and that every one of us should study it until we understood why we had not thought of it ourselves. I did not look at the screen. I looked at Draxus. He was 2 rows behind her and 1 aisle over, and I watched the words land on him like falling stones. His crest rose. His talons closed slowly around the edge of his reinforced desk, and the metal made a small sound of complaint. 40 years, Thalor had said. Finest he had reviewed. The whole class turning to look at the small, soft creature in the back row, while a prince of the Korgath sat in her shadow. 10 weeks of poisoned pride reached their limit in a single heartbeat. I saw him move before anyone else did, because I was the only one watching him instead of her. He rose from his seat without a sound, which should have been impossible for a creature of his size, 3 meters of crimson plating uncoiling in perfect predatory silence, and I opened my mouth to shout a warning, and my voice failed me completely, and he crossed the aisle in one enormous stride and swung his open hand with every gram of his strength at the back of Grace Miller's head. I want to tell you exactly what happened next, and I want to tell it slowly, because at the time it did not happen slowly. At the time it happened in the space of 2 heartbeats, and half the class missed it entirely because they blinked. It took me years, and many patient explanations from Grace herself, to fully understand what my eyes recorded in those 2 seconds. So let me give you the gift she eventually gave me. Let me show it to you the way she lived it. The first thing you must understand is that she knew he was coming before he moved. Not by magic, by attention. Humans evolved on a world where the thing that ended you was the thing you failed to notice, and their senses are tuned in ways ours are not. She had spent 10 weeks learning the rhythm of that classroom, the hum of the vents, the scratch of styluses, the particular creak of a Korgath training desk under a Korgath body. When Draxus rose, the creak stopped. A sound she had heard 1,000 times went silent, and her body understood what that silence meant before her mind finished the thought. The second thing you must understand is what she did with that warning. Any other creature in the academy would have used it to flee, to duck away, to put distance between itself and the danger. Distance feels like safety. It is instinct written into almost every species in the galaxy. Grace moved toward him. The blow was already falling when she left her chair. She did not stand up. She flowed sideways and back, under the arc of his swing, inside it, into the one place in the entire room where his strength could not reach her, the small pocket of empty air close against his own body, where a long arm cannot generate force. His hand passed through the space where her head had been and met nothing, and 3 meters and 400 kilograms of committed momentum kept going with nowhere to land. Here is what I have learned since about the physics of that moment, and I promise you it matters. Strength is not a shield. Strength is a payment, and momentum is the debt it buys. When you swing everything you have at a target, and the target is suddenly not there, all of that force still exists, and it belongs to you, and it must go somewhere. Every warrior species in the galaxy builds its fighting arts around delivering force. The humans, small and soft on their terrible world, built theirs around a different question entirely. What if you could make your enemy's force your own? Her hands found him as he passed. That is the only way to describe it. One hand closed on his wrist, the other rose to his elbow, and she did not stop his arm. She helped it. She guided all that beautiful wasted power exactly where it was already going, and then a little further, turning his straight line into a curve, and she stepped through the curve with her hip against his center of gravity, and she bent her knees, and she borrowed him. 400 kilograms of apex predator left the floor. I will hear that sound for the rest of my life. Not a crash, a single enormous deep boom, like a ship docking too fast, as the prince of the Korgath met the deck flat on his back, with his own strength added to gravity's. The floor plating flexed. Dust jumped from the light fixtures. Somewhere in the room, a Veilari made a sound like a tea kettle and fell out of its chair. And before the echo finished, before Draxus even understood that the ceiling was above him now, she had followed him down. This is the part the rumors always get wrong, so let me set it down precisely. She did not strike him, not once. Not one single blow was thrown by a human hand in that classroom. What she did was worse, and I mean worse in the way that winter is worse than a fire, colder, quieter, and utterly beyond argument. She took his striking arm with her whole body. Her legs crossed over his massive shoulder, her hips locked against his elbow, his wrist secured against her chest, his own limb turned into a lever against its own joint. It is a position humans have a name for, one of the oldest techniques on their world, and its logic is simple and terrible. The arm bends one way. The human controls whether it continues to. Draxus surged. I felt it through the floor. Every muscle in that enormous body ignited at once. A lifetime of predatory strength thrown against one small human, and the position did not move a single centimeter, because it was not her strength holding him. It was geometry. It was leverage. It was his own mass pinning his own shoulders, while his own elbow argued against its own design. The strongest creature in the academy was fixed to the floor of our classroom by physics itself, and physics does not care how many worlds your bloodline has conquered. He roared. The sound shook the windows. He thrashed and heaved, and his talons raked the deck plating, carving bright grooves in the metal, and none of it changed anything at all, and slowly, horribly, the roaring stopped, because even a Korgath prince eventually understands what his own joints are telling him. Then it was quiet, truly quiet. 43 cadets from 30 different worlds sat frozen in a silence deeper than any I have known before or since, and in the middle of that silence, Grace Miller spoke for the first time. Her voice was not loud. It was not angry. It was the exact same level voice she used to answer questions in class, and somehow that was the most frightening thing of all. She said, "Stop moving. You will hurt yourself." Not a threat, advice. Sincere, practical advice, delivered to the creature who had just tried to end her, and I watched the truth of it break across the faces of every cadet in that room. She was not fighting him. The fight, if it had ever existed at all, had lasted less than 2 seconds and been over before most of us processed that it had begun. What we were watching now was something else, something none of us had a word for. She was containing him, the way you contain a fire, the way you contain a flood, calmly, completely, and with no hatred at all, because you do not hate weather. Draxus stopped moving. She adjusted her grip slightly, and I saw her do something with his wrist, a small, precise rotation, and the great body beneath her went rigid, and I understood that she had just shown him, gently, exactly how much further the lever could travel and exactly who decided whether it would. His breath came in huge, shuddering drags. 10 weeks of contempt were collapsing inside him in real time, and underneath them, rising like water through a cracked hull, was something I do not believe any Korgath of his line had felt in 1,000 years. He was afraid, and she had not harmed him. That is the point I need you to hold on to. There was not a scratch on him beyond what his own talons had done to the floor. Every gram of damage in that room had come from his own strength, redirected and returned to sender, and now the room could see what I had seen through a door panel late at night. The stillness was a leash, the patience was a door, and behind the door was not a monster. Behind the door was a professional. Someone in the front row finally remembered how to breathe. The sound broke the spell, and suddenly the room was chaos. Cadets shouting, chairs scraping, someone calling for medical, someone else already replaying the recording on their desk display in disbelief, slowing it down, frame by frame, trying to find the moment where the impossible had happened, and finding only a small gray figure moving toward danger while everything in the galaxy says to move away. Through all of it, Grace did not release him. She did not even look up. She kept her position, kept her breathing slow, kept the Prince of the Korgath pressed flat against the classroom floor, and waited, with that same infinite death-world patience, for the one thing she actually wanted. Not victory. She had that already, and it clearly meant nothing to her. She was waiting for a witness with authority. The doors of the lecture hall slid open, and Commander Thalor stood in the doorway, summoned by the alarm, his old gray eyes taking in the scene, the shattered arc of the ruined desk where the blow had begun, the gouged floor, the frozen class, the largest cadet in the academy pinned and breathing hard beneath the smallest, and I watched 4 decades of experience move across his face and arrive at the truth in roughly 3 seconds. He looked at the security recording node in the ceiling. Then he looked at Grace. And Grace Miller, still holding the lock, calm as still water, said the sentence she had been waiting 10 weeks to say. "Commander, I am formally reporting an assault." She did not let him go when he yielded. "I need you to understand this, because it is the part of the story that everyone misunderstands, and it is also the part that matters most." Draxus tapped the floor with his free hand, the Universal Academy signal of surrender, the signal that ends every sparring match, every dispute, every contest in Concord space. 43 cadets saw him give it, and Grace Miller, who had shown no anger, no cruelty, and no violence beyond pure redirection, looked at that tapping hand and did not move. A murmur went through the room. Even Thalor's brow shifted. Surrender is sacred among warrior cultures. Refusing to accept it is considered the deepest dishonor there is. Grace spoke without raising her voice. She said, "Commander, I will release him the moment this incident is entered into the official record as an assault, with the recording preserved and the witnesses logged." Not before. Thalor asked her, carefully, why, and she gave the answer that I have thought about every single day since. She said, "Because if I let him up now, this becomes a fight. Fights have two sides. Fights get forgotten. What happened here was not a fight. He attacked a seated classmate from behind in the middle of a lecture, and I defended myself, and those are two different things, and the record needs to say so while every witness is still in this room. Mercy without consequence is not mercy, Commander. It is permission. Mercy without consequence is permission. Write that down somewhere. Carve it into a wall. It is the most human sentence I have ever heard, and the entire galaxy was about to learn what it meant." Thalor made the log entry right there, speaking the formal words aloud. Timestamp, incident class, witness count, recording secured. And the instant the console chimed its confirmation, Grace released the lock, unwound herself from the Prince of the Korgath, and stepped back 3 precise paces. Then she did something that stunned the room more than the takedown had. She offered him her hand. Draxus stared at it from the floor. A small, soft, 5-fingered hand, no talons, no plating, extended down toward him without a trace of mockery. Getting up with her help would have been the deepest humiliation his culture could imagine. Getting up alone was barely better. He rolled to his feet by himself, swaying slightly, cradling his shoulder, and for one long moment, predator and human looked at each other in absolute silence, and it was the predator who looked away first. Medical confirmed his shoulder joint had been stressed but not damaged. She had taken him to the exact edge of harm and held him there, the way an engineer holds a system at tolerance, and not 1 micron past it. The medics said it was the most controlled application of force they had ever documented. They did not sound impressed when they said it. They sounded unsettled. The tribunal convened 9 days later, and that is when the second storm arrived, the one made of politics instead of muscle. Draxus was a second son of a ruling dynasty, and dynasties protect their blood. Within a day of the incident, a Korgath diplomatic cruiser was in orbit. Within 2, an ambassador with ceremonial armor and a voice like a war drum was in the Academy Director's office, and the pressure began. Quiet pressure at first. Suggestions that the matter was a youthful dispute, best handled internally. Then louder pressure. Trade agreements mentioned. Border Patrol cooperation mentioned. The word incident slowly replaced the word assault in official memos, and I watched it happen with a sick feeling in my stomachs, because I recognized the shape of it. The hunt had simply changed weapons. Talons had failed, so now came influence, precedent, exhaustion, all the patient tools that powerful families use to make inconvenient truths quietly disappear. They were about to learn that patience was the wrong battlefield to choose against a human. Grace requested a formal open hearing, as was her right under Academy Charter, section by section, clause by clause. It turned out she had read the entire charter. All 900 pages. She quoted it from memory. The request could not legally be refused, and suddenly, the youthful dispute was scheduled for the Great Tribunal Chamber, with a full panel and public record. I attended. Half the Academy attended. The Korgath ambassador sat in the front row in his ceremonial armor, and his legal delegation filled 2 benches, and across from all of that power and history and rumbling gravity sat 1 human cadet at a small table, alone, with a single data slate. The delegation spoke for 2 hours. They were brilliant, I will admit it. They painted the incident as mutual, a clash of proud warrior spirits, regrettable but ordinary. They questioned the reliability of memory. They suggested the human had provoked confrontation through weeks of what they called calculated disrespect, by which they meant her exam scores. They proposed that both cadets accept mild sanctions and a formal reconciliation, balanced and fair, and I could feel the room drifting toward the comfortable middle, the way rooms always do. Then it was her turn, and Grace Miller stood up, and she said she would need 11 minutes. She used 9. She did not argue. That is what none of us expected. She did not raise her voice, did not appeal to honor or sympathy, did not answer a single characterization the delegation had made. She simply presented the record. The classroom footage, played once at full speed, 2 seconds of motion that made the entire chamber inhale at once. Then again, at 1/10 speed, with her calm, level voice narrating the timestamps. Here is Cadet Draxus rising while the instructor speaks. Here is the distance he crosses. Here is the angle of the strike relative to a seated target facing away. Here is the moment of contact he intended. Here is the medical projection of what that contact would have done to a human skull. The projection stayed on the screen for 5 full seconds, and the chamber was so quiet I could hear the ambassador's armor plates shifting. Then she showed the maintenance logs, 10 weeks of them, cross-referenced, the breathing unit serviced during his duty shift, the console errors matching his access windows, the roster deletion traced to a terminal in the Korgath wing. Item by item, date by date, no accusations attached, no anger, just a pattern laid out with such precision that the pattern accused itself. She had been documenting everything from the very first week. Every incident I thought she had ignored, she had recorded, timestamped, and filed. The patience I had mistaken for endurance had also been evidence, quietly accumulating, the whole time. And then she closed with the part that no one in that chamber ever forgot. She said that she was not requesting punishment. She said that outcomes were the tribunal's responsibility, not hers, and she trusted the panel completely. She requested only that the records state the truth, because her planet had learned at terrible cost what happens when records are bent to comfort the powerful, and Earth had sworn an oath about it, and as long as she wore a Concord uniform, that oath was in the room with her. 9 minutes. She sat down. The delegation asked for a recess and never really recovered. The panel ruled the next morning. Assault, confirmed. Premeditated pattern of harassment, confirmed. Draxus was stripped of his cadet rank and his officer track, reduced to provisional status, and sentenced to a full year of restorative service under Academy supervision. The ambassador's protest was noted, recorded, and filed, which by then everyone understood was exactly the fate Grace wished upon it. But here is the discovery that changed how I saw her species forever, and it came to me that same week, buried in the legal citations of the ruling itself. The tribunal's authority to override diplomatic pressure in cases of recorded assault came from a Concord statute called the Personal Conduct Accords, the framework governing duels, challenges, and violence between members of different species. I looked up its history, expecting some ancient Concord Council. The Accords were drafted 90 years ago, by the human delegation. It was one of the first things Earth did after achieving contact. And when I read the original preamble, written by human hands, I finally understood everything. The document did not read like a species protecting itself from a dangerous galaxy. It read like the opposite. It was full of restraints, cooling periods, mandatory witnesses, strict proportionality, absolute limits, and one line in the preamble that made my hands go cold. It said that the signatories of Earth, knowing their own history, bind themselves first. Knowing their own history, humans had looked at the stars, and then looked at themselves, and their first act among 100 alien civilizations was to build a cage of law and lock their own strength inside it, voluntarily, before anyone even understood that they needed to. Draxus struck first, and lost in 2 seconds. That is the story everyone tells. But sitting in the archive that night, I understood the real story. The 2 seconds were nothing. The 2 seconds were merely the door opening a crack. The true weight of humanity was everything around those 2 seconds. The 10 weeks of patience before them, the evidence gathered without anger, the procedure followed without exception, the law they had written against themselves a century in advance. Any species can be dangerous. I come from a galaxy full of dangerous species. I had just discovered the only one that was dangerous, knew it, and had made self-control the foundation of its entire civilization. And the strangest chapter of all was still to come, because 11 days after the ruling, Draxus, stripped of everything, did something no prince of his bloodline had done in 1,000 recorded years. He knocked on her door. He stood in her doorway for a long time before he found his voice, and when he finally spoke, the Prince of the Korgath said 2 words that his ancestors would have chosen exile over speaking. Teach me. I know this because I was there. Grace had been helping me with my tactical coursework that evening, and I froze solid in my chair when that enormous shadow filled the doorway. Every instinct my species owns screamed at me to find a vent shaft and live in it. But Grace just looked up from the study table, looked at the stripped rank patch on his uniform, looked at the way he held himself, which was different now, smaller somehow, though he had not lost a centimeter of height, and she asked him one question. Why? He struggled with it. I watched a creature built for certainty wrestle with the first real doubt of his existence. And then he said something that told me the fall to that classroom floor had broken more than his pride. He said, "My whole life, I was told that strength is what you are. You showed me that strength is what you choose. I do not know how to choose. No one on my world does. Teach me." Grace was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Training is at 5 each morning. If you are late once, do not come back." And she returned to my coursework as if the most feared bloodline in the galaxy had not just bent its knee at her door. He was never late, not once, in a full year. I know, because I started going too. So did others. It began with just the 3 of us in the auxiliary hall in the cold hours before dawn, 1 human, 1 disgraced prince, and 1 trembling gray scholar with 4 left hands. And I learned very quickly what Grace had meant, all those months earlier, about mercy, because as a teacher she showed none. Not the cruel kind of none, the other kind, the kind that refuses to accept less than what you are capable of, that spares no ego, permits no shortcut, and accepts no excuse, because excuses are just surrender wearing perfume. The first month, we did not learn a single technique. We learned to fall. I thought it was a joke. Draxus thought it was an insult. 1,000 falls, she said, before anything else. Falling forward, falling backward, falling sideways, from standing, from moving, from being pushed, until the floor stops being your enemy and becomes just another direction. Korgath do not fall, Draxus growled on the 3rd morning, and Grace answered without even turning around. She said, "I know. That is why you lost. Everyone falls, Draxus. Your species just never practiced. So when it finally happened, you had no idea what to do down there." He stopped growling. He started falling. 400 kilograms hitting the mats, over and over, hour after hour, morning after morning, learning at last the lesson his entire civilization had skipped, that the ground teaches you more than the sky ever will, and that the one who is not afraid of falling is impossibly hard to throw. The 2nd month, we learned to breathe. The 3rd, to stand, truly stand, balanced, rooted, relaxed. It sounds like nothing. It is everything. And somewhere in those slow, patient months, without my noticing the exact moment it happened, my fear began to leave me. Not because I was becoming dangerous, because I was becoming calm, and I finally understood that they are the same discipline. The stillness I had seen in Grace on her first day, the quality that had unsettled me before I could name it, was not something humans are born with. It is something they build, deliberately, the way you build a bridge, and she was showing us the blueprints. Word spread the way word always spreads in an academy. By the 6th month, the auxiliary hall was full every morning. Velari learning to redirect instead of wound with words. Austrians learning that their heavy patience was a gift and not a slowness. Cadets from 30 worlds lining up in the dark to be thrown by a human and taught how to land. Even Relos came, the 6-eyed Velari who had called her a pet on the first day. He stood in the doorway with his eyes dimmed in embarrassment, and Grace simply pointed to a place in the line as if the first day had never happened, and that was that. The line had room. The line always had room. That was the whole point of the line. And the one who helped the newest students most, the one who caught them when they fell wrong and walked them patiently through their first terrified mornings, was Draxus. I watched the change in him across that year, the way you watch a season change, too slowly to see and impossible to miss. The crest that used to rise at every imagined slight stayed smooth. The talons that used to flex at every challenge stayed still. He had been the strongest cadet in the academy his entire life, and now, For the first time, he was becoming the safest to be around, and I do not think I can explain to someone who was not there how much larger that made him seem. The true test came in the 11th month, and it did not come for Grace. It came for him. A new cadet arrived that term, a Korgath of a rival dynasty, young and loud and burning with everything Draxus used to be. He had heard the story. Everyone in the galaxy had heard the story by then, and he decided that restoring Korgath honor was his personal destiny. He found Draxus in the main hall in front of hundreds of witnesses, and he said unforgivable things. About his fall, about his stripped rank, about his family, his blood, his shame, words chosen with surgical care to force a response, because among the Korgath, such words answered with anything but fury are a confession of cowardice. The hall went silent. I saw students actually backing toward the exits, and I watched Draxus, 3 meters of apex predator with 1,000 years of fury in his veins, absorb every word without moving, and then do the single most difficult thing I have ever seen anyone do. He smiled, calmly. The way weather cannot insult you. He said, "Thank you for your honesty. Training is at 5 each morning, if you are ever curious what I learned down there on that floor." And he walked away, and the silence he left behind him was the sound of an entire species' history changing direction, one choice at a time. The young Korgath stood alone in the hall, armed with insults that had hit nothing, and I recognized the expression on his face, because I had seen it before, on another Korgath, above a broken desk, on a gray morning that felt like a lifetime ago. The confusion of a hunter whose prey refuses to exist. 3 weeks later, I saw him in the 5 o'clock line. He was terrible at falling. Everyone is, at first. Grace graduated at the end of that year, first in the Academy's history to finish with a perfect tactical score, and the Concord offered her a command posting on the frontier, and she took it, and the morning she left, the entire 5 o'clock class stood in formation outside the shuttle bay without anyone having organized it. 200 cadets from 40 worlds. Draxus stood at the front, wearing the provisional rank he had rebuilt from nothing, and he saluted her in the human style. Flat hand, straight spine, and 200 cadets who had learned to fall followed him, and I saw the one and only time in 3 years that Grace Miller's calm cracked, just slightly, just around the eyes. She stopped in front of me last. My 4 hands were shaking, which by then was rare for me. She said, "Velkesh, you were the first one who was not afraid to sit down. Do you know why I said yes when Draxus asked me to teach him? I said I did not." She said, "Because you had already proven the door works in both directions. The strong can learn gentleness, but the gentle can learn strength, and you taught the class that half of it, my friend, every single morning, just by showing up. I still cannot repeat that without my voice failing. So I will move on. She is a captain now, out on the frontier, and the stories drift back to us, the way starlight does, old and bright and true. Disputes she settles without a single shot. Standoffs that end with 2 enemy commanders in a room and a pot of that terrible spiced tea she loves. Pirates who surrender on hearing her ship's name, not because of what she has done to anyone, but because of what everyone knows she could do and never has. The most feared officer on the frontier has the shortest casualty list in the fleet. Only humans could make those 2 facts into the same fact. And the 5 o'clock class never ended. Draxus runs it now, restored to full rank 2 years early by unanimous recommendation, and it has spread to 3 other academies. And last term, the Korgath homeworld formally requested a human instructor for its own royal military school. The request was written by the ruling family. The second son had recommended it. I teach the newest students how to fall, me, the trembling gray scholar with the 4 left hands. Life is very strange. Sometimes, in the early dark, before the hall fills up, I stand where her desk used to be in the old lecture room, and I think about how the galaxy got everything backward. We looked at the death world and its people, and we saw monsters in soft costumes, strength hiding inside weakness, a predator pretending to be prey. We were wrong in every direction at once. The strength was never hiding, it was waiting. on a leash made of law and choice and a million years of hard lessons, held by a species that feared its own history enough to write chains for itself before it wrote anything else. Humans were never the monsters of their terrible world. They were the ones the monsters learned to respect. And then, because they are human, and this is the part no other species saw coming, they turned around, reached a hand down to the very things that had hunted them, and said the words that built their whole civilization and are slowly rebuilding ours. Get up. Try again. Draxus asked me once, after training, why I thought she never harmed him that morning, when she held his arm, and the whole galaxy would have called it justice. I told him what I believe, with both of my hearts. I said, because she was never fighting you. From the first day to the last, she was only ever waiting for you, the way a teacher waits for a student who is late. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, she waited 10 weeks, and I attacked her for it, and she answered by teaching me to stand. And he shook his great crimson head slowly, the way he does when the human way still amazes him, which is often, which is always. He struck first, right there in class, and she took him down instantly, and the galaxy called it no mercy shown. The galaxy was right, in the end, just not in the way it thought. Her mercy was never soft, and it was never absent. It was the hardest thing in the known universe, patient as a death world, relentless as its storms, and it did not stop until it had lifted everyone in its reach, including the one who fell. He struck first. She made sure that no one at that academy, and someday, I believe, no one anywhere, would ever need to strike at all.